planet Xylos 4 was not a place for the living. It was a world of white shadows, screaming winds, and a cold so deep it could shatter bone. For Elara, a researcher from the delicate Lyrian species, it was a graveyard. The wind howled like a hungry beast, throwing sharp ice crystals against her helmet. Her vision was blurred. Every step felt like she was dragging lead weights through the deep snow. On her wrist, a small red light flashed rhythmically. It was a death sentence. Battery low. Thermal shield failing, a robotic voice whispered in her ear. Elara's blue skin was turning a pale, sickly gray. Her species was built for the warm, tropical moons of the inner rim, not this frozen hell. She had been separated from her team during the sudden blizzard. Now, she was alone. She fell. Her knees hit the ice, and she didn't have the strength to get back up. She crawled, her thin fingers digging into the snow, looking for any kind of shelter. But there was nothing. Only the endless, white storm. "Please," she whispered, though she knew no one could hear her. "Please. I'm freezing." Her lungs burned. Every breath felt like inhaling needles. She felt a strange heaviness in her eyes. The doctors always said that freezing to death was like falling asleep. She was ready to sleep. But then, she saw it. Through the thick curtains of blowing snow, a dark shape appeared. It was massive. It stood on two legs, but it was much larger than any Lyrian. It moved slowly, steadily, unaffected by the wind that was trying to blow Elara away. Fear spiked through her chest. A frost walker, she thought. The legend said they were monsters of ice that hunted anything with a heartbeat. She closed her eyes and curled into a ball. She prayed the end would be quick. The crunching of snow grew louder. Crunch. 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 The monster was standing right over her. Elara felt a massive shadow block out the dim light of the dying sun. She waited for the teeth. She waited for the claws. Instead, she felt a hand. A huge, heavy hand grabbed her upper arm. Elara let out a weak cry, but then her entire world changed. Where the hand touched her, she didn't feel the cold bite of ice. She felt heat. It wasn't just a little warmth. It was a burning, intense heat. It felt like someone had pressed a warm stone against her frozen skin. The monster didn't eat her. It pulled her up with incredible strength. Elara felt herself being lifted off the ground as if she weighed nothing. She was pressed against a hard, bulky chest. Even through the layers of her suit and the creature's heavy gear, the heat was radiating like a furnace. "I've got you," a deep, vibrating voice said. The language was strange, but the tone was calm. It wasn't the sound of a beast. It was the sound of a protector. The figure turned and began walking into the teeth of the storm. He didn't stumble. He didn't stop. He carried her like a precious cargo, shielding her body with his own. Elara was too weak to move, but she found herself clutching at his chest, trying to get closer to that impossible warmth. After what felt like hours, the wind suddenly died down. They had entered a small, narrow ice cave. The stranger set her down gently against a wall of rock and knelt in front of her. In the dim light of the cave, Elara finally saw her savior. He was wearing a heavy, rugged environmental suit, stained with oil and dirt. He reached up and pulled back his hood, then unsealed his face mask. It was a human. Elara had heard stories about humans. They were a young species, often ignored by the rest of the galaxy. They didn't have psychic powers or high-tech energy shields built into their bodies. But as the human took off his thick gloves and reached for her hands, Elara gasped. His skin was a dull tan color, but it was glowing with a faint redness from the exertion. When he took her small, frozen hands in his, she almost screamed. You're burning," she managed to say, her voice trembling. The human, whose nameplate read JAX, looked at her with kind, tired eyes. He smiled, and she could see steam rising from his mouth. "No," he said softly. "I'm just a human. We're a bit warm-blooded, that's all." To Elara, warm-blooded was an understatement. Her sensors, still flickering on her wrist, showed a reading that shouldn't be possible. The human's body temperature was nearly 37 degrees Celsius. In this freezing world, he was a walking sun. He pulled her closer, wrapping his large arms around her. He wasn't using a heater. He wasn't using a machine. She expected the cold embrace of death. Instead, she felt a heat so intense, she thought she was touching a star. Who, or what, was this human? And why was he risking his life to keep a stranger warm? Outside, the storm grew louder, and a distant, hungry howl echoed through the mountains. The Frostwalkers were coming. But for the first time, Elara wasn't afraid. She was held by the fire of a human. Inside the tiny ice cave, the air was silent, except for the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the human. Elara was still shaking, but it wasn't just from the cold anymore. It was from shock. She was pressed against Jax's chest, and the heat coming from him was terrifying. To her species, a body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius was a sign of a deadly fever. Any Lyrian with that much heat would be dead in minutes. Their brains would melt. But Jax looked fine. In fact, he looked focused. He reached into a side pocket of his rugged suit and pulled out a small, silver-wrapped bar. He tore it open with his teeth and began to eat quickly. What is that?" Elara whispered. Her voice was weak, but she could finally speak. "Fuel," Jax replied. His voice was deep, like the rumbling of an engine. "My body is burning energy to keep us both warm. I need to keep the fire fed." Elara looked at the small screen on her wrist. Her sensors were finally working again. She scanned him, and her eyes went wide. "The readings, they make no sense. Your heart is beating so fast. Your blood is moving with incredible pressure. How are you not exploding?" Jax gave a small, tired smile. "I come from a place called Earth. It's a death world. Gravity is high, the sun is harsh, and the weather is unpredictable. My ancestors had to outrun predators for hours. Our bodies became high-performance machines. We don't just survive heat, we produce it." Elara shivered. She had spent her life studying advanced technology, but she had never seen a biological machine as efficient as this human. He was a living battery. But then, the temperature in the cave suddenly dropped. A low, vibrating growl echoed from the darkness of the cave entrance. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic. It was hungry. "Shoo," Jax whispered. He immediately pulled Elara behind him. He didn't have a laser rifle or a plasma sword. All he had was a heavy metal wrench he had grabbed from his tool kit. In the shadows of the cave mouth, two glowing blue eyes appeared. These were the Frostwalkers. They were the kings of Xylos 4. They didn't see light, they saw heat. In this frozen world, everything was blue and black to them. But Jax? To the Frostwalker, Jax was a giant, glowing orange sun. He was the brightest thing on the planet. "It sees us," Elara whimpered, clutching Jax's jacket. "It sees me," Jax corrected her. "I'm like a lighthouse in the dark. It thinks I'm a big, warm meal." The Frostwalker stepped into the dim light. It was a nightmare of evolution. It had 6 legs with ice-picked claws and a mouth filled with serrated glass-like teeth. It was built to kill in the snow. The monster lunged. It was fast, moving like a blur of white fur and muscle. Elara closed her eyes, expecting to hear Jax scream. Instead, she heard a loud crack. She opened her eyes and saw something impossible. Jax hadn't stepped back. He had stepped forward. He had caught the monster's front leg with his bare hand and smashed his heavy wrench into its side. The Frostwalker screeched in pain. It tried to bite Jax's shoulder, but the human was faster. He used his shoulder to ram the beast against the icy wall of the cave. The ground shook. Elara watched in awe. Humans didn't just have heat, they had power. On Earth, Jax had to move against heavy gravity every day. On this low-gravity planet, he was a super soldier. Jax let out a roar of his own. It was a loud, primal sound that echoed through the cave. He hit the beast again, and the Frostwalker, sensing that this prey was actually a predator, turned and "Don't let me fall asleep," Jax said. "If I stop moving, my core temperature will drop. If I stop, we both die." He pulled her close again. Elara felt his skin, it was even hotter now, burning with the adrenaline of the fight. She wrapped her arms around him, refusing to let go. She was a creature of the cold, clinging to the only fire in the universe. As they stepped out into the screaming wind, Elara saw more blue eyes glowing in the distance. Dozens of them. The hunt had begun. The world outside the cave was no longer a planet, it was a screaming wall of white death. The wind on Xylos 4 didn't just blow, it pushed with the weight of an ocean. Jax stepped into it, carrying Elara inside his massive outer thermal coat. She was tucked against his chest like a small, frightened bird. To Elara, the world was dark and vibrating. She could hear the heavy thump-thump of Jax's heart. It was loud and fast, like an engine running at full speed. But she could also feel something terrifying. Jax was shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer effort of staying alive. Every time a blast of frozen air hit him, his body had to burn thousands of calories just to keep his blood from turning into ice. "Jax?" Elara whispered, her voice muffled by his layers. "You're shivering. Is the fire going out?" Jax didn't answer immediately. He took a heavy step, his boots sinking deep into the frozen crust of the planet. I'm fine," he grunted. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "Just a lot of wind. Stay close, Elara. Don't let your skin touch the air." In the dark, Elara looked at her scanner again. The readings were dropping. Jax's body temperature had been a steady 37 degrees, but now it was 35.5. To a human, this was the start of hypothermia. To Elara, he was still a furnace, but the furnace was running out of wood. Suddenly, Jax stopped. Through a small gap in the coat, Elara saw them. The Frostwalkers. They weren't attacking yet. They were smarter than she thought. They were circling just outside the range of Jax's vision. Dozens of glowing blue eyes flickered in the storm like ghost lights. They weren't hunting for a fight, they were waiting for the sun to go out. They knew the human couldn't keep this heat up forever. They were waiting for him to fall. "They are following us," Elara whispered, her heart racing. "They are waiting for us to die." Jax let out a low, dry chuckle that turned into a cough. "Let them wait. Humans are very good at being stubborn. We didn't survive Earth by being the fastest or the strongest. We survived because we don't know how to stop walking." He pushed forward again. Each step was a battle. The ice under his feet was slippery, and the wind tried to knock him over. At one point, Jax stumbled. He fell to one knee. Elara felt the impact. She felt the heat of his body flicker. "Jax! Get up! You said I shouldn't let you sleep." Jax's head was hanging low. His breath was coming in ragged gasps. The steam rising from his face was becoming thinner. The Frostwalkers moved closer, their claws clicking on the ice. The circle was tightening. One of the beasts, a large alpha with a scarred face, stepped within 10 feet. It opened its mouth, showing rows of glass teeth, waiting for the human to collapse. But Jax wasn't done. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small, red cylinder, an emergency adrenaline shot. He didn't hesitate. He jammed it into his thigh through his suit. His body jerked. His heart rate tripled. Elara felt a wave of heat explode from him. It was a temporary, violent burst of energy. Jax stood up, his eyes bloodshot and glowing with a strange, fierce light. Not today, he roared at the blizzard. Not today. The roar was so loud and so full of primal rage that the Frostwalkers actually stepped back. They had never heard a sound like that. It wasn't the sound of a dying animal. It was the sound of a predator that had been pushed too far. Jax began to walk again, but his pace was different. He wasn't just walking, he was marching. He began to talk to Elara, his voice slurred but determined. Tell me about your home, Elara, he gasped. Tell me about the trees. We're almost there, Jax whispered. He was hallucinating now. He thought he saw the lights of the outpost, but there was only white. I can see the porch light. My mom, she's making coffee. Elara looked out. There was no outpost. Only a massive, frozen ravine they had to cross. And at the bottom of the ravine, the entire pack of Frostwalkers was waiting. They had blocked the path. Jax stopped at the edge of the slope. He looked down at the monsters. He looked at Elara inside his coat. He looked at his shaking, frozen hands. Elara, he said softly. Whatever happens next, don't let go of me. Even if I stop talking. Even if I feel cold. You hold on until the sun comes up. The Alpha Frostwalker let out a high-pitched scream and began to climb up the slope toward them. The Alpha Frostwalker climbed the slope, its claws digging into the ice like daggers. Behind it, 10 more monsters followed. Their blue eyes were fixed on Jax. To them, he was no longer a threat. He was a dying fire, a flickering candle in a hurricane. Jax's vision was swimming. He saw 2 alphas instead of 1. His hands were so cold they felt like blocks of wood. But inside his coat, he felt the small, rapid heartbeat of Elara. That tiny heartbeat was the only thing keeping him standing. Jax, please, Elara cried, feeling him sway. Put me down. Save yourself. You can run faster without me. Jax didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was partially frozen. Instead, he tightened his grip on her. He reached into his tool belt and found his last resort, a flare gun used for signaling ships. He didn't point it at the sky. He pointed it at the Alpha. Boom. The red flare streaked through the white storm, hitting the Alpha squarely in its chest. The beast didn't die, but it screamed in agony. These creatures lived in -50 degrees, a burning magnesium flare was like being touched by a sun. The Alpha fell back, tumbling down the slope and taking 2 other monsters with it. Go! Jax hissed. He didn't run. He couldn't run. He began a heavy, limping march down the other side of the ridge. Every step felt like his bones were snapping. The rest of the pack didn't stay back for long. They were hungry, and the smell of Jax's blood, warm, iron-rich human blood, was calling to them. They began to leap from the rocks. Jax swung his heavy metal wrench. He wasn't a soldier, he was an engineer. But he knew how to hit things until they broke. He smashed the skull of the first monster that jumped at him. He kicked another with his heavy boots, sending it flying into a snowdrift. But there were too many. A smaller Frostwalker lunged and bit into Jax's thigh. Jax didn't scream. He didn't have the energy to scream. He simply grabbed the monster by its neck and squeezed. His Deathworlder muscles, built for Earth's gravity, crushed the creature's throat in seconds. He tossed the body aside and kept walking. Why won't you stop? Elara whispered in horror and wonder. She saw the blood on the snow. She saw his breath coming out in thin, gray clouds. Because. Jax gasped, his voice barely a whisper. Humans, don't stop. They reached the bottom of the ravine. The emergency beacon was visible now, a small, blinking orange light on top of a metal pole. It was only 500 meters away. But between them and the beacon was a frozen lake. And standing on that lake was the rest of the pack. Jax's body finally hit its limit. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees on the ice. The predators circled him. They were silent now, sensing the end. The Alpha, its chest scorched black from the flare, stepped forward slowly. It opened its mouth, ready to end the story of the human. Elara crawled out from Jax's coat. She stood in front of him, her small blue body shaking. She had no weapons. She was a fragile researcher. But she tried to look brave. "Leave him alone," she screamed at the monsters. Jax looked up. His eyes were almost white from the cold. He saw Elara trying to protect him. Something inside his brain, something ancient and primal, snapped that a human's body has hidden reserves of energy called hysterical strength. It only activates when death is certain. Jax's heart, which had been slowing down, suddenly hammered against his ribs. His skin turned a deep, angry red. He stood up. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like a demon of heat. He let out a roar, a sound so loud it cracked the thin ice on the lake. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a promise of death. He charged. He didn't use the wrench. He used his hands. He punched, grabbed, and threw the frostwalkers as if they were made of paper. He was moving with a speed that defied physics. He was a blur of orange heat in the blue dark. The predators, terrified by this sudden explosion of violence, began to scatter. They had never seen a living thing fight like this while dying. Jax grabbed Elara, threw her over his shoulder, and stumbled the last 100 meters. He reached the beacon. With his last bit of strength, he smashed the emergency button. A massive pillar of light shot into the sky, piercing through the storm. Then, the heat left him. The adrenaline vanished. Jax fell against the base of the beacon. The red color drained from his face, replaced by a deathly blue. He slumped over, his eyes closing. "Jax! No! Stay with me!" Elara screamed, grabbing his face. His skin was cold. For the first time since she met him, the human was cold. The fire had gone out. In the distance, the roar of a rescue ship's engines could be heard, but Elara didn't look up. She threw her body over Jax, trying to give him back the warmth he had given her. "Don't go," she sobbed. "Please, don't go cold." The aftermath, the bond of fire and ice. The rescue ship, the Silver Wing, descended through the storm like a falling star. When the medical team hit the ground, they found a sight that made them freeze in their tracks. The human, Jax, was lying motionless against the metal beacon. He looked like a statue carved from ice. Over him, Elara was screaming for help, her small blue hands rubbing his frozen chest. "Get him to the heat chamber." Quickly, the lead doctor, an alien with 4 eyes, shouted. They lifted Jax onto a hovering stretcher. When the medical bots touched his skin, their sensors malfunctioned. "Warning," the bot chirped. "Patient temperature is dropping below critical levels. Biological engine is failing." Inside the ship's high-tech medical bay, it was chaos. The alien doctors had never treated a human before. They saw Jax's heart rate, which was now only 20 beats per minute, and assumed he was already dead. "He is gone," the doctor said, looking at the screen. "No species can survive this level of cellular freezing. His organs are shutting down." "No." Elara pushed through the doctors. She looked at the flat line on the monitor. She remembered the roar Jax had let out in the storm. She remembered the heat of his skin when he was fighting the monsters. "He isn't like us. He doesn't give up. Look at his eyes." The doctors looked. Jax's eyes were closed, but his jaw was locked tight. Even in a coma, even while freezing to death, his muscles were still holding on. Suddenly, the monitor began to beep. 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 Impossible, the doctor whispered. His internal temperature is rising. But we haven't started the heaters yet. It was the human Deathworlder biology. Jax's body had sensed the warmer air of the ship. His brain had sent a final, desperate signal to his cells, wake up. Feed the fire. His liver began dumping stored glucose into his blood. His heart, like a rusted engine being kicked into life, began to pump faster and faster. Jax's body wasn't just recovering, it was fighting its way back from the grave. 12 hours later, the storm on Xylos 4 had finally ended. The sun was rising over the White Plains. Inside the recovery room, the air was kept at a steady, warm temperature. Jax opened his eyes. Everything was blurry. His body felt like it had been hit by a spaceship. Every muscle ached. But he felt something heavy on his right side. He looked down. Elara was there. She wasn't sitting in a chair. She was curled up on the edge of his bed, her head resting on his arm. She had wrapped herself in a thick blanket, but she was still leaning as close to Jax as possible. Jax tried to move, and Elara immediately jumped up. Her eyes were wide and full of tears. Jax. You're awake. The doctors said, they said you were dead for 3 minutes. Jax gave a weak, shaky smile. He reached out with a bandaged hand and patted her shoulder. His skin was warm again, not the burning heat of the fight, but a gentle, steady glow. 3 minutes. Sounds like a nice nap, he joked, his voice raspy. Elara didn't laugh. She grabbed his hand and held it against her cheek. You carried me for miles. You fought a pack of frostwalkers with your bare hands. You gave me all your heat until you turned blue. It's what we do, Jax said simply. Humans don't leave their pack behind. I am your pack now. Elara asked softly. Jax nodded. Yeah. You're part of the crew now. A nurse walked in to check Jax's vitals. Sir, we need to move the patient to the scanning room for a brain check. Miss, please step aside. But Elara didn't move. She gripped Jax's hand tighter. When the nurse tried to gently pull her away, Elara let out a small, defensive hiss, a sound her species only made when protecting their young. Jax laughed, which made his chest hurt. I think she's staying, document. For the next week, it became a legend on the medical station. No matter where Jax went, the cafeteria, the X-ray room, or the garden, Elara was there. She was like a shadow. She wouldn't let him go. She had spent her whole life in the cold, fragile world of science, but she had finally found something solid. Something warm. The galaxy had always feared humans. They called them violent, loud, and dangerous. But as Elara sat next to Jax, watching the stars from the station window, she knew the truth. Humans weren't just dangerous because they could kill. They were dangerous because they would die to keep you warm. And once you felt that fire, you never wanted to live in the cold again. Jax looked at her and held out a piece of earth chocolate. You want some? It's good for the heart. Elara took the chocolate, leaned against his warm shoulder, and closed her eyes. I already have what's good for my heart, she whispered. The fire of humanity was still burning bright.